Hello, I'm Doug Hewitt. My wife Teresa and I have been members of the church for about 42 years, and I was given the topic of resisting deception based on Ephesians 4:14. One thing you have to recognize is the tool of deception has been used by the adversary since the very beginning with Adam and Eve, and it talks about it at the end with the great delusion coming about in Revelation. You have to recognize, a corollary here is you have to recognize that you can be, you have been, and you will be deceived. You have to operate in humility. Otherwise, Jesus in his model prayer would not have used the line, lead us not in temptation / deception. It is our Achilles heel, and Christ recognizes that. You are vulnerable. The second thing is you have to recognize truth, okay, in order to recognize deception. An interesting word for truth in Hebrew is emet. Okay, it's an aleph, mem, tav. The aleph is the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet. The mem is a middle letter, and the tav is the end letter. Basically, what it's saying is to know truth, you have to know the end from the beginning, and then there's only one source for that, and that's the word itself. Okay, and you can only recognize deception by recognizing truth, to know the end from the beginning, and you have to go to the source there. You have to know his word. But a corollary of knowing his word, all right, is the fact that you got to recognize your ability to be deceived. Case in point is the scribes and Pharisees. They knew the Bible better, or scripture better than anyone around. They memorized most of the Old Testament, and yet they did not recognize the incarnate word walking among them. And also think about this, Solomon. Okay, Solomon was supposedly the wisest man to live. He felt he could actually change one tiny letter in the Torah, the Yod. All right, and when he did that, all right, it led to him to allowing himself or rationalizing that he could gather wives to himself, he could gather horses. In other words, he could be disobedient. It led to the destruction of his family. It led to the destruction of a nation. But think about this. Psalm 103:7 says this. It says that the Israelites knew the acts of God, but God revealed his ways to Moses. Your goal in studying scripture is not just to know the acts, it's to know the ways. And that's when Solomon changed that one little yod. Jesus actually in the New Testament talks about that one jot or tittle shall be changed until all be fulfilled. He's actually making a reference to don't change what the scripture is revealed, as it is revealed. There's an interesting passage in Malachi 3:10, and it's generally used to talk about tithing and obedience to tithing and bringing in the tithes into the warehouse. However, I think there's a corollary or a deeper meaning there. And that's this. It's talking about being obedient to the word. He uses the metaphor. He says, try me in this and see if I will not open the windows of heaven to such a blessing that your storehouses can't hold it. It's an interesting fact or metaphor that he uses when he talks about a window. A window is generally thought about as something you see into and see out of. What he's basically saying is obedience to my word and knowing my word and action of that obedience will lead to you being able to see into the mechanics of heaven. You will have discernment that's beyond your physical capabilities. What's more important or what's more valuable? A large checkbook or knowing the ways of heaven, knowing the heart of God such that you know what motivates him to act. To me, that is the why, knowing the whys of God. Just recently, I asked the youth, a part of the youth, all right, how often does God command us to read the Bible? And you get various answers, but to cut to the chase here, it's in Deuteronomy 31:10-13. God tells them to hear the scriptures, hear the Torah once every 7 years. Let that sink in. Once every 7 years. They didn't have their copies. Yet God held them accountable for not obedience to his word, but they only heard it every 7 years. I guarantee you within earshot of this, what I'm saying here, that each of you have a copy of your scripture, or most of you have two. If God held them accountable for not being obedient to hearing and obeying his word every 7 years, think of what that means for accountability for us. Not using the greatest tool we have against deception. Try him. He will open the windows of heaven.